The moment Marcus Henderson stepped out of his front door that Tuesday morning, he knew something was wrong. His normally quiet suburban street was alive with whispers, and several neighbors stood in small clusters, casting furtive glances his way. But it wasn't until he reached his mailbox that the magnitude of the situation became clear. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, staring at the official-looking envelope stamped with violation notice in angry red letters. Marcus had lived in his modest ranch-style home for nearly 3 years without incident. He meticulously maintained his property, planted the neighborhood's most admired vegetable garden, and even organized the annual block party last summer. He was, by all accounts, a model resident. Tearing open the envelope, Marcus's confusion turned to disbelief, then simmering anger. The notice, complete with his home address and a grainy photograph, accused him of unauthorized usage of Sycamore Estates community facilities and repeated trespassing violations. It further stated that if these infractions continued, legal action would be pursued. Sycamore Estates. "That's not even my neighborhood," Marcus said aloud, looking up and down the street of his own Maple Grove community. The two developments were adjacent, separated only by a small grove of trees and a meandering creek, but they were distinctly different neighborhoods with different governance structures. Maple Grove was a loose collection of single-family homes with no formal homeowners association, while Sycamore Estates was notorious for its strict HOA and Byzantine regulations. The notice was signed by Kathleen Winters, HOA board president. Marcus vaguely recalled seeing the name on community bulletin boards, usually attached to complaints about everything from holiday decorations to grass height. Local social media groups had given her the nickname HOA Karen for her relentless pursuit of rule violations, real or imagined. Just then, Marcus's phone chimed with a text from his next-door neighbor, Sophia. "Have you seen next door today? You're the talk of the town. Call me." With growing dread, Marcus opened the neighborhood app to find a lengthy post from Kathleen Winters herself, complete with timestamps, dates, and blurry surveillance photos of what she claimed was Marcus repeatedly trespassing on Sycamore Estates property. The post had already gathered dozens of comments, with opinions divided between those calling for his head and others defending him. "This has to be a mistake," Marcus muttered, zooming in on the photos. The figure was indeed wearing a blue jacket similar to his, but the image was too pixelated to make out any distinguishing features. What was clear, however, was that the location in question was the community park that sat directly between the two neighborhoods, a park Marcus had been using for his morning jogs for years without issue. A sleek black SUV slowed as it passed his house, a driver, a middle-aged woman with immaculately highlighted hair, giving him a cold stare before speeding away. Marcus didn't need to see the Southeast HOA bumper sticker to know who it was. Back inside, Marcus spread the violation notice on his kitchen table and began drafting a response. This was absurd. He'd never even set foot in a Sycamore Estates clubhouse or pool area. The park in question had always been presented as public space, used by residents of both communities. There were no signs indicating it was private, no fences marking boundaries. His phone rang. It was Sophia again. "Marcus, it's getting weird out there. Karen's been driving by your house all morning. And now there's talk about them installing cameras aimed at your property." Marcus sighed, glancing out his window at the peaceful street he'd come to love. How had this happened? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? "Tell me everything you know about Kathleen Winters," he said finally. "I think it's time I introduced myself to the HOA Karen." What he didn't realize was that this was just the beginning of a neighborhood feud that would soon spiral beyond anything he could have imagined. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the Sycamore Estates Community Center with a folder of documents tucked under his arm. After a sleepless night researching property lines and public easements, he discovered something interesting. The park in question had been designated as a joint-use space in the original development plans. It technically belonged to neither neighborhood exclusively. He pushed through the glass doors into a pristine lobby where a receptionist eyed him suspiciously. "I'm here to see Kathleen Winters," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. "Do you have an appointment?" the woman asked, her fingers hovering protectively over her keyboard. "No, but I'll handle this, Diane." The voice came from behind him, sharp and commanding. Marcus turned to find himself face to face with Kathleen Winters herself. In person, she was exactly as he'd imagined, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer, her blonde hair styled in a precise bob, with red-framed designer glasses perched on her nose. The kind of woman who looked like she'd never had a hair out of place in her life. "Mr. Henderson, I presume," she said, not extending her hand. "I'm surprised to see you here. Usually, our violation notices are addressed through proper channels, not personal visits." "That would be appropriate if I were actually part of your HOA," Marcus replied, "which I'm not." Kathleen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Why don't we discuss this in my office? The office was as meticulously organized as its occupant, with framed certificates of appreciation from the HOA board lining the walls. One photo showed Kathleen shaking hands with the mayor at a community event. "Let me be direct," Kathleen said, sitting primly behind her desk. "Our security cameras have captured you using our park facilities repeatedly over the past month. As a non-resident of Sycamore Estates, you are not entitled to access amenities that our residents pay premium HOA fees to maintain." Marcus placed his folder on her desk. "I've done some research, Ms. Winters. According to the original land development agreement filed with the county, that park is designated as a shared recreational space for both communities. I have the documentation right here." Kathleen barely glanced at the folder. "Those documents are outdated. Our board renegotiated the terms 3 years ago. Without consulting Maple Grove residents, that's not legal. We most certainly followed proper procedures," she sniffed. "Perhaps if your neighborhood had organized governance instead of that chaotic free-for-all you call community living, you'd have been properly represented in the discussions." Marcus felt his temper rising but fought to keep his voice calm. "My chaotic neighborhood manages to maintain beautiful homes and friendly relations without threatening people with violation notices. And I've spoken to several of your residents who weren't even aware the park was supposedly off-limits to neighboring communities." Something flashed in Kathleen's eyes. Anger, certainly, but also something else. Nervousness. "The rules are clearly posted," she insisted. "They weren't until yesterday," Marcus countered. "I took photos of the park entrance every day this week. The private property signs only appear after you sent me that violation notice." The room fell silent as they stared at each other across the desk. Through the window, Marcus could see residents walking their dogs along perfectly manicured sidewalks, oblivious to the tension brewing in the HOA office. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Henderson?" Kathleen finally asked. "I want the harassment to stop. I want you to issue a correction on that neighborhood app post where you essentially called me a criminal. And I want confirmation that the park remains a shared space, as it was always intended to be." Kathleen's laugh was cold. "Or what? Or I'll be forced to bring this matter to the attention of the county zoning board, along with some interesting financial documents I found regarding HOA fee allocations for park maintenance that don't seem to match the actual expenditures." The color drained from Kathleen's face. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm proposing a solution," Marcus replied calmly. "The easiest path forward for everyone." Kathleen stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. You'll be hearing from our attorney." As Marcus was escorted out by security, an excessive measure that drew curious stares from residents in the lobby, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was another post from Kathleen on the neighborhood app, this one claiming he had aggressively trespassed on. By the weekend, what had begun as a personal dispute had transformed into a full-blown neighborhood war. Marcus had spent Thursday evening going door-to-door in Maple Grove, sharing copies of the original development plans and explaining the situation. Many residents were outraged, particularly those who had been using the park for years without incident. "I've lived here for 22 years, Mrs. Abernathy," a retired school teacher, told him as they stood on her porch. "My grandchildren learned to ride their bikes in that park. And now this woman thinks she can just put up some signs and pretend it's always been their private property." Within 48 hours, a Maple Grove Community Action Committee had formed, with Marcus reluctantly agreeing to serve as spokesperson. Their first official act was to draft a letter to the county commissioner requesting clarification on the park's legal status. But Kathleen Winters had not been idle. On Saturday morning, Marcus woke to the sound of engines and men shouting. Looking out his window, he was stunned to see a construction crew erecting a fence along the tree line that separated the neighborhoods, directly blocking the footpath that Maple Grove residents had used to access the park for decades. He threw on clothes and rushed outside, where a small crowd of his neighbors had already gathered. Among them was Derek Chen, a local attorney who had volunteered his services to the newly formed committee. "This is completely illegal," Derek muttered, watching as the workers pounded metal posts into the soft earth. "They can't obstruct an established right-of-way without proper permits and public hearings." When Marcus approached the foreman and asked to see their construction permits, the man simply pointed to Kathleen, who stood nearby supervising the work with evident satisfaction. She wore designer sunglasses despite the cloudy day and held a tablet where she appeared to be checking items off a list. "Ms. Winters," Marcus called out, "you need to stop this immediately. You don't have the authority to block access to a shared community space." Kathleen didn't even look up from her tablet. "I'm not engaging with you, Mr. Henderson. If you have concerns, direct them to our attorney." She gestured toward a tall man in an expensive suit who stood a few paces away, watching the confrontation with a practiced, neutral expression. By now, residents from both neighborhoods had gathered on either side of the emerging fence. Maple Grove residents outraged, Sycamore Estates residents confused or supportive, depending on how much they knew about the situation. "This is ridiculous," Kathleen called out a man from the Sycamore side. Marcus recognized him as Michael Delgado, who had been friendly when they'd met at community events. "We never voted on this fence. When was this decided?" "Emergency board meeting," Kathleen replied curtly. "Security concerns." "The only security concern is in your imagination," Marcus shot back. "There's never been a single incident in that park." More Sycamore residents began to question Kathleen, creating a crack in her otherwise united front. Marcus noticed she seemed less confident now that her own neighbors were challenging her. Just then, a police cruiser pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. The crowd fell silent. "We received reports of a disturbance," the older officer said, looking between the 2 groups. "Someone want to explain what's happening here?" Before Marcus could speak, Kathleen stepped forward. "These individuals are attempting to interfere with authorized improvements to private property. We have all the necessary paperwork." She handed the officer a folder that she'd apparently prepared in advance. Marcus exchanged glances with Derek, who nodded subtly. "Officer," Marcus said, "we have documentation showing this is a shared community space according to the original development plans and that no permits have been issued for fence construction that would block an established public right-of-way." The younger officer looked uncomfortable. "Look, this seems like a civil matter. We're not here to determine property rights." "Actually," Derek interjected, pulling out his phone, "I've just received confirmation from the county zoning office that no construction permits have been filed for this location. Building a fence without proper permits is a code violation." The officers conferred quietly, then approached the construction foreman. After a brief conversation, the foreman signaled his crew to stop work. "We'll need to see those permits," the older officer told Kathleen. Her composure slipped momentarily. "This is absurd. I'll have your badge numbers. Do you know who my husband is?" The officer remained impassive. "Ma'am, without proper documentation, this construction needs to halt until the matter is resolved." The encrypted file contained 3 years of Sycamore Estates HOA board meeting minutes, financial statements, and email correspondence that painted a disturbing picture. Over breakfast, Marcus explained his findings to Sophia and Derek. "It's worse than we thought," he said, spreading printouts across his kitchen table. "For the past 3 years, the HOA has been drastically overstating maintenance costs for all common areas, including the park. They've been collecting nearly double what they actually spend." Derek examined his spreadsheet, frowning, and the surplus funneled into a special projects account controlled exclusively by the executive board, basically Kathleen and her 2 closest allies. Marcus pointed to a series of transfers. The account has accumulated over $300,000, but there's no record of how that money is being used. "That would explain why she's so desperate to establish exclusive control of the park," Sophia observed. "If Maple Grove residents started asking questions about why we've never contributed to maintenance costs for a supposedly shared space." "Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting." Marcus pulled up another document. 3 months ago, Sycamore Estates signed a preliminary agreement with Platinum Ridge developers to sell them a parcel of land for a new luxury townhome complex. Guess which parcel? "The park," Derek said, eyes widening. "But they can't sell shared community property without establishing exclusive ownership first," Marcus finished, "which explains the sudden urgency to keep us out, the hastily erected signs, the fence. They're trying to erase any evidence that it was ever a shared space." Sophia shook her head in disbelief. "And the money from the sale?" "The contract stipulates a $1.5 million payment to Sycamore Estates, with a $150,000 consulting fee to be paid directly to a company called Winters Consulting Group." "Let me guess, owned by Kathleen Winters," Derek said. "Bingo. She gets a personal cut of 10% for arranging the deal." Marcus leaned back, running his hands through his hair. "They're selling off common green space for personal profit, and they needed to erase any claim Maple Grove might have to stop them." The doorbell rang, startling them all. Marcus peered through the peephole to see Michael Delgado standing on his porch, looking nervously over his shoulder. "I wasn't sure if you received the files," Michael said after Marcus invited him in. "I sent them from a burner phone." "You're our anonymous friend?" Marcus asked, leading him to the kitchen. Michael nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from Sophia. "I've been on the HOA board for 2 years. At first, I thought Kathleen was just overzealous about rules. Then I started noticing discrepancies in the financial reports." "Why come forward now?" Derek asked, still cautious. "Because of the park deal. I bought in Sycamore Estates precisely because it had such beautiful green spaces. Now Kathleen and her cronies are selling off to pad their own pockets." Michael's voice hardened. "And they're using our HOA fees to fund the legal work to make it happen." "How many other residents know?" Sophia asked. "Not many. Kathleen schedules important votes during holiday weekends when most people are away." The board meetings are technically open, but they're held at 2 p.m. on Thursdays when most people are at work. Classic tactics, Derek muttered. Maintain the appearance of transparency while ensuring minimal participation. We confronted Kathleen after she filed the fence permits without board approval, Michael continued. She claimed it was an emergency security measure. When I pressed about the park sale, she said it was just exploring options and accused me of breaching confidentiality. We need to act quickly, Marcus said. According to these documents, they're finalizing the sale next month. Derek examined the contract. This hinges on Sycamore Estates proving exclusive ownership. If we can demonstrate the park's shared status before the sale closes, the deal falls apart. There's an HOA general membership meeting tomorrow night, Michael said. Normally only a handful of people show up, but if we could pack the room. With residents from both neighborhoods, Marcus finished an idea forming. They spent the rest of the morning developing a plan. By afternoon, a joint task force of Maple Grove and Sycamore Estates residents was distributing flyers throughout both communities, inviting everyone to an emergency community meeting about the future of. The county detention center was cold and impersonal, with fluorescent lights humming overhead as Marcus sat across from Derek. Through the plexiglass partition, his attorney friend looked tired but determined. Computer fraud? Theft of confidential information? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. What is she talking about? She's claiming you hacked into the HOA's private servers, Derek explained, consulting his notes. The charges allege you accessed password-protected financial records and board communications without authorization. But I couldn't hack anything. Michael sent those files voluntarily. Michael is denying any involvement, Derek said grimly. He claims his email was compromised and someone must have stolen the information using his credentials. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He's backing out after everything. Kathleen apparently threatened to sue him personally for breach of confidentiality. He has 2 kids in college. He can't risk it. Derek leaned closer to the glass. But here's where she made a mistake. By filing these charges, she's acknowledged the documents are authentic. She's not denying their contents, just how you obtained them. That doesn't help me much if I'm in jail, Marcus said, gesturing at his surroundings. The bail hearing is in 3 hours. We're gathering character witnesses and community support. Derek checked his watch, and Sophia is coordinating a rally outside the courthouse. This arrest has backfired spectacularly. Both neighborhoods are in an uproar. True to Derek's word, when Marcus emerged from the courthouse that afternoon, released on his own recognizance, he was greeted by dozens of supporters from both Maple Grove and Sycamore Estates. Someone had made signs reading "Parks Not Profits" and "HOA's Gone Wild." Local news vans lined the street, reporters eager to cover the story of a homeowner arrested for allegedly exposing HOA corruption. The narrative was irresistible. David versus Goliath, with a power-hungry HOA president in the villain role. The judge seemed skeptical of the charges from the start, Derek explained as they pushed through the crowd. Especially when Eleanor Martinez submitted an affidavit confirming the park's shared status and questioning the legality of the pending sale. What about the HOA meeting tonight? Marcus asked. Still on. Kathleen can't cancel it without violating their bylaws, and after this, Derek gestured to the crowd and news cameras. She wouldn't dare. Too many people are watching now. That evening, the Sycamore Estates Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Residents spilled out into the hallway and parking lot, where someone had set up speakers so everyone could hear the proceedings. Inside, every seat was filled, the people standing along the walls. The crowd was a mix of Sycamore Estates homeowners in business casual attire and Maple Grove residents in more relaxed clothing, united in their concern. When Kathleen entered with the other board members, the room fell silent. She looked shocked at the turnout, but quickly composed herself, straightening her blazer and approaching the podium with practiced confidence. This meeting will come to order, she announced, her voice wavering slightly. We have a standard agenda, Toe. Point of order, called a voice from the back. It was Michael Delgado, looking pale but resolute. According to the bylaws, members may motion to amend the agenda at the beginning of any general meeting. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Kathleen stared at Michael with barely concealed fury. I move that we discuss the pending sale of Sycamore Park to Platinum Ridge developers. Michael continued, and the board's failure to disclose this transaction to the membership. Second, called several voices simultaneously. That matter is not up for discussion, Kathleen snapped. It involves confidential negotiations. Negotiations involving the sale of common property require membership approval, countered another board member, visibly breaking ranks. It's in our charter, section 4.3. The meeting devolved into chaos as residents demanded answers. A Sycamore Estates homeowner near the front stood and addressed Kathleen directly. Is it true you're getting a personal commission on this deal? Eleanor Martinez from the county zoning office raised her hand and was recognized by the increasingly flustered board secretary. As a point of information, any change in land use from designated community open space would require public hearings and environmental